A couple of big things happened in 1967. First, I was born. Second, two women, Kathrine Switzer and Bobbi Gibb, lined up to run the Boston Marathon. In 1967, women weren't allowed to enter marathon races. They did it anyway. Their impact, Kathrine's was loud, Bobbi's was quieter, but both changed the story about women in endurance. The following year, I began my running career. I was a 10-pound pom who'd sailed to the other side of the world, and my first steps on Australian soil were to run like crazy in a park in Perth. A little girl whose future in running had been made more possible by the women who'd come before her. And in 2023, at age 56, I found myself back in Perth, ready to again run like crazy. But before I tell you about that adventure, let me fill in the gaps between Nikki, aged 18 months, and Nikki, aged 56. The story about women in endurance had begun to change. Now all I had to do was grow up and see where my feet could take me. My teens were for schooling, my 20s for partying, my 30s for pregnancy, raising a child, and building an income as a single mum. My 40s were for building a business and dealing with everything that life could throw at me. And then came my 50s, and with them, perimenopause. And suddenly, science and society was yelling at me, saying, hold on, you're on the wrong side of the bell curve. You're in decline. I didn't like that story very much. I finally had the time and the space to see how far my feet could take me, and I was being told I was too late. Maybe I was raging against the machine, but at age 50 and at the start of my perimenopausal era, I decided to run 63 marathons in 63 days throughout the UK. Not many people believed I could do it. I was told I was too old, I wasn't good enough, I wasn't fast enough. I was also told that my name sounded like a porn star, which somehow meant I couldn't run marathons. Like Kathrine and Bobbi, I did it anyway. And much to the surprise of the non-believers, I got better at endurance. This was not a story of decline. This was a story of potential. And it got me thinking, maybe I don't have to follow this stereotype of a downward path. Maybe I could consider potential. Now, that's not to say I breezed through perimenopause. I absolutely didn't. I fractured my pelvis due to bone density issues. I battled with mood swings and brain fog. I was even misdiagnosed with depression. It was another one of my perimenopausal symptoms. It took me a long time to figure out what I needed to do to help me to move better, feel better, and cope during this time. But during this time, I also stayed curious about this potential, and I went on some training runs. I ran around Ireland, the length of Wales, across the Netherlands, and 1,000 miles in 40 days on a treadmill. It wasn't one of my funnest adventures, but it was training. And in 2023, at age 56 and still perimenopausal, I found myself back in Perth, ready to again run like crazy. This time, not just in a park, but across the entire country, from Perth to Sydney, 4,044 kilometres in 76 days, this time running an ultramarathon a day. Before the run, I did pitch a big global brand to help film the adventure, to showcase a midlife woman, the mindset of endurance, the extreme and beautiful outback Australia, and midlife as a launchpad rather than a limitation. The response I received was, sorry, we're looking for younger protagonists with more interesting backstory. That brand did support a younger male counterpart of mine. It did hurt, but it did something more. It highlighted this cultural blind spot. It suggested that as we get older, our stories become less relevant. And it doesn't just stop at sponsorship. As a woman who'd worked for 40 years in the fitness industry, I wanted to understand what the research was saying about women of my age. And what I mostly found were papers with the framework of decline. The words loss, frailty, reduction, risk being the main headlines. Very little about performance potential. And it's not that the research is wrong. We do decline over time. But if we only ever look at decline, we'll only ever see decline. So here it was, these blind spots and gaps. Because once upon a time, society said that women couldn't run endurance. They were wrong. Sports science said, if you study men, you can transfer that information to women. They were wrong. We were then told that women made research too complex. We could be ignored. That was both wrong and right. Women are complex. And as Dr. Stacey Sims says, women are not small men. Women need to be studied across their entire lifespan. So here were these gaps and blind spots that needed to be studied. Because if science doesn't study us, society won't see us, brands won't back us, and we will disappear into the abyss of decline. That's the gap I'm running into. Like Kathrine and Bobbi, I want to continue changing the story about women in endurance. Now, if you'd seen me running along the road in Australia, you'd have noticed nothing extraordinary about me. Just a woman in a hat, putting one foot in front of the other, seeing how fast she could run across the country. Sometimes I'd be making shapes as I run danced. Other times, the tears would be flowing as I tried to keep going. This was hard. It required all of my determination, persistence, resilience, commitment, and grit. These are the things that you don't see from the outside. These are the psychological levers that I believe have been my superpowers that have helped me get better at endurance with age. And these are the things that I developed through my less interesting backstory. I also had to rely on these other mind processes: self-love, self-compassion, and self-belief. Because as I ran along the roads in Australia, I often heard the truckies on their CB radios saying, there's a Sheila on the road. Is she mental, crazy, insane, mad, lost? Sometimes it made me laugh. I do say that I like to run like crazy, but other times it hurt. The previous year, a young man ran the same route as me. He was cheered, sponsored, made into a national hero, and rightly so. This was a tough gig. But my experience, my mental capacity, and my place on the road attempting a record was constantly questioned. And the thing is, I'm not an outlier. I look at other midlife women entering endurance events, excelling with distance and age. And some race stats shows that as the distance gets longer, the performance gap between women and men starts to narrow, with some women excelling beyond their male counterparts the longer and tougher the race. These are great headlines. So where's the research? Not how women compare to men, but how women evolve across their entire lifespan. Because we do go through changes and we do evolve, not just erode. These were these blind spots and gaps yet again. So at the end of Run Australia, I came back here, I went back to school. I'm now at Loughborough University studying sports and exercise psychology. I'm not a qualified researcher yet, but I am working towards it because I am passionate about closing those gaps. Because whilst Kathrine and Bobbi began to change the story in 1967, for the next 6 decades, women like me trained and competed through puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause with very little sports science on women, about women. Among the thousands of sports science studies, only 1 in 3 participants are women, and of those studies, only 6% are on women, about women. And less than 1 in 10 of those studies looks at women in midlife and beyond. And another interesting research result is that when women aren't leading the research, we're less likely to be included in it. And that matters because leadership shapes visibility, and visibility shapes care and society. The world has waited long enough. It is changing, and I want to be a part of that change. I recently graduated my perimenopausal era. I'm now entering my research era. My dissertation is looking at imposterism and self-compassion in sports settings because I've felt it. That quiet voice inside my head saying, I don't belong here, I've been let in by mistake. Because when society continually tells you you're the wrong demographic, you start to internalise it. And when science says you're on the wrong side of the bell curve, you're in decline, well, that becomes the narrative. And research suggests that imposter feelings don't come from weaknesses. They can often be driven by exclusion. So as you sit and listen to my experience, I invite you to consider where in your life are you being told you're on the wrong side of the bell curve, you're in decline. And to notice if there's a gap between what society is saying and what you still believe is potential within you. And if there is a gap, then I urge you to jump into it and do it anyway, because the world can't wait to know your potential. And so here is my hope, that the next generation won't be running into the same gaps that I've been running into as a midlife woman, that science will study us, brands will back us, and society will see us, not as complexities to be ignored, but as potential to be explored. And I also hope that in a couple of years, I'll be back here telling you more stories from my research era, because I am not slowing down, I am ramping it up. And next year, in my 60th year on the planet, I'm going back to Australia and I'm running back from Sydney to Perth to stay curious about potential and to gather stories and evidence for future research. Because sometimes endurance doesn't end with age, it gets better. And if you only ever look at decline, you'll only ever see decline. But if you look at potential, now that's a story I do like. The world can't wait for women to be studied, seen, and supported. And that's a gap I'll keep running into until it closes.